Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Academy. I'm Graham Richmond and I'm with Alex Brown for this lesson on recommendation letters. It's actually the second lesson in our little series of tips on recommendations. And Alex, I wanted to use this one to talk about who one should pick, because sometimes I'm a little surprised at what people come up with. So in a nutshell, who are the right people to be writing these letters?
Yeah, so in the first lesson on recommendations, we picked the obvious choice, right? That's your immediate current immediate supervisor,
Right?
And so the majority of candidates will select that as the principal recommender. I mean, it's going to assume that you've worked with that person for a period of time, so it's not just you've just got a new job and you're in it for a week and they can write the recommendation. That's not going to happen. But typically your immediate supervisor, direct supervisor, and then the majority of schools will ask for two recommenders. So it might be your prior supervisor within the same firm. If you worked at a separate firm before the current firm that you're in, it might be a supervisor from that firm, especially if you kept a relationship with them. That's quite important.
Yeah.
Or it could be that you've done some interesting things outside of work in your volunteer experiences, and in that capacity there might be an opportunity for a second recommender to come from that aspect of your career.
Yeah. So I think we'll get into some of the dilemmas that people face in sourcing these letters, but absolutely, if all things being equal, direct supervisor, recent supervisor before that, maybe from another firm if you've worked at multiple firms, or something from your outside activities if you have a supervisor type person who could speak to that. But let's get into these common dilemmas, because people always come to us and say, well, that would be great, but my boss doesn't know I want to go to business school. And if she knew, I'd be given my walking papers before I can even apply, because they don't want to lose me and they're not going to, or they won't pay me my bonus if they know. So there are all kinds of dilemmas that people face. What do you do in that situation if your boss doesn't know?
So for any of these common dilemmas, so before we go through each one of them, what your approach should be to use the optional essay to explain your choice of recommenders. And in that way, for this particular dilemma, you can say, I work for a company, whatever, which isn't necessarily an MBA feeder company, and I'm nervous that by asking my boss, I'm tipping my hand for something that's uncertain, and so on and so forth. So use the optional essay to explain any constraints that you have in terms of your recommender choice. Then the question becomes, well, who should you choose in that regard? And it might be that there is a previous supervisor within your firm that you've maintained a relationship with, where it's not so critical that you're tipping your hand to, and they can keep it sort of private between you for the time being. So that might be the right choice. And again, you can also go to sort of outside of work activities that you've been heavily involved in, and so on and so forth. But there's no doubt in these circumstances, so through all the common dilemmas, you're going to have to be a little bit more creative in terms of sourcing recommenders. But ADCOM does recognise that not all students or candidates are applying from situations that are very positive about their employees getting MBAs.
Yeah, agreed. I feel that it's worth sussing this out. Like, sometimes your boss may not know you're applying, but you need to really think through, like, how risky is it for your boss to know?
Right.
There could be situations where you might be pleasantly surprised. There's a risk factor there. But I do agree, obviously, if you worked at two different companies, that's a great way to, just get someone from the old company. What about the scenario, and you alluded to this, I think, before, but you're in a new role, you recently have a new supervisor. And, schools do often say, we want a current supervisor. Well, what if that current supervisor has only been supervising you for a month or two?
Yeah, that's not the right choice.
Right.
I mean, you need someone that's got a track record with you, seeing you sort of follow through on projects, on work, where there's real outcomes and outputs. So they can actually measure and judge, right? So they can't just think just because you're a wonderful guy, they just hired you, that they can write a great recommendation, because they still don't know your work.
Yeah, agreed. So I think that's fine. So if it's a really new boss, go to the one prior.
Yeah.
Now, there are instances where, and we see this time and time again, where someone says, well, I don't have anyone that can write a letter for me because I started my own company.
Yeah.
Or I work in my family's business and the only people that supervise me are my mom or my dad. What do we do in those types of scenarios?
You don't get your mum to write the letter. She won't write a positive recommendation.
It'll be too positive, really, is what happens,
I mean, but obviously, you avoid any family recommendations. You try to avoid recommendations where there might be sort of a bit of a bias influence, because it's, maybe the supervisor or whatever in the family business recognise if they don't write a strong letter that they're going to be penalised because they're in the family business. So you've got to understand all that dynamic that might be at play. There might be examples of going after mentors, maybe there's firms that are associated with the family business or with you as an entrepreneur that whether it's your accountants or whatever it might be, that might be able to write recommendations for you because they know, they're familiar with your work product and so forth. But again, it's the other alternative is to look into your volunteer activities and other avenues outside of work. But not to keep repeating myself, this optional essay is super important to explain how you came up with the one or two choices for your recommenders, just so that the AdCom reading it recognises the constraints you are under.
Yeah, and just to background that a little bit, almost every business school, at least the types of schools that we're speaking about in this series, have an optional essay, and they ask you specifically to address this kind of thing there. Yeah. So I feel that every entrepreneur has, just by virtue, they have people that have helped them along the way, mentors, people who are more senior to them that they've gone to for advice. And those are the kinds of people that you can source a letter from in many cases. So, but never use mom, dad, or even an uncle. I've seen, people try all kinds of things, but you don't want a blood relation writing these letters. We touched on this in the first lesson on Rex, but the old, you write it, I'll sign it. What I want to do this time, though, is dig a little deeper. What if your current supervisor has agreed, then things come a little bit down to the wire and they come back and say, geez, I'm really busy. How about you write it, I'll sign it. What do you say to them to get them off of that?
Well, hopefully in the next lesson when we talk about coaching recommenders, you avoid that problem in the first place, because that's all about managing the process.
Yes.
So you really need to make sure that the recommenders that you've gotten are not only on board but are well prepared to go through with this process. So if a situation like this arises, it sort of is a bit of an indictment on your own management skills because you've let this situation come to this. You really shouldn't be writing even drafts of these documents. So again, it's back to sort of the ethics of it. So you're going to have to go find someone else, I guess. Yeah.
So I think, as you say, and in the next lesson we'll talk about how to manage and coach your writers, but ideally they write it. Yeah. That's how it has to happen. Yeah. Now, one thing that I see over and over again is someone will write an email to me and say, I have a current supervisor and I want them to write, but this one school that I'm applying to, I happen to know someone 3 floors above me in the building who went to that school. Yeah. I've never worked on a project with them, but we work for the same company, and they're willing to write my letter for that school. Yeah. What do you make of that?
I don't think that's a good option. It's an interesting opportunity, but not a good option for a letter of recommendation, because the people writing these 1 or 2 letters of recommendation that the school is asking for, they need to really add substance to the candidacy. So they need to know your work product. They need to be able to sort of endorse in a proper fashion in that regard. If this person doesn't know you to that level, it's a bit risky. Now, having said that, maybe they can become a cheerleader for you through the process as an optional sort of endorsement and so forth. So that might well come up sort of later in the process, and maybe even when we talk about wait lists and stuff like that, you might need folks to weigh in for you. So what an opportunity to get a different voice, but an alum from that program. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, so putting them to use later in the process, or even earlier when you're picking somebody's brain about the program and needing data points for your essays and things.
Get
But
that fit right.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's a bad idea to just try to find someone who went to the school to write for you unless they genuinely have supervised you. One other thing I wanted to mention in this lesson is the value of the different perspectives. So if you have 2 letters to submit, sometimes I think, you see people, they just get 2 letters from work and they're really the same, saying very much the same thing. It's the current supervisor and the supervisor right before or something. And you feel like there's a missed opportunity if that person had, a different role that they could have sourced a rec from, like an outside activity in their community. So I do think that balance here can be useful. It can be a nice way to demonstrate that you have both a professional life and a personal life where you're doing things in your community. So don't rule that out. But the other thing I wanted to ask you is, we see people coming saying, well, I have 6 people who could write letters for me, and I'm going to mix and match for every school because I don't want to overwhelm any of them. So I'm going to have these 2 write for this school, then person 1 and new person 1 write for, so what do you make of that strategy? Because we see it a lot.
It's a bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to manage it. Managing 2 recommenders is going to be hard. Managing 6 and getting it all right and so on and so forth, it's going to be very challenging. So my frank advice would be try to focus on the 2 best. Recognize that, as you said, most schools now adopt the GMAT common questions for the recommenders. So again, when we talk about coaching, you can make the process more accessible for each of your 2 recommenders. But I think that's going to be your better bang for the buck.
Yeah, agreed. So I feel like in the next lesson, where we're going to talk a little bit about, how to coach your recommenders, we'll give folks good information on making that process as easy as possible. Because otherwise, it's just, you're never going to be able to manage 6 different recommenders and even remember who's writing for which school and when it just becomes a bit of a nightmare. And I just think you're forming a team kind of to get into business school, and you want it to be a kind of close-knit team. You don't need everyone involved. So, all right. So up next, as I just mentioned, we're going to do an academy lesson on how to coach the recommenders you've selected to write for you.